Good afternoon, everyone. I call this meeting to order. Welcome, everyone, to meeting number 139 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Canadian Heritage. Today's meeting taking place in a hybrid format. I would like to remind the participants of the following points. As we get set, before speaking, please wait until I recognize you by name. For members participating in person, just raise your hand if you wish to speak, and the clerk and I will do our best to maintain the speaking order, as always. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair, and all witnesses have completed the requirement on the connection. And that brings me to, we did have a connection problem here this afternoon with the Arab Canadian Lawyers Association. We have omitted them. The sound was not good enough today for the meeting. So our witnesses in front of us today, Stéphane Séraphin, the Assistant Professor from the University of Ottawa, and the Media Smarts, Catherine Hill, the Executive Director, and Matthew Johnson, Director of Education. So what it means is the Arab Canadian Lawyers Association will in fact be asked to come at a later date, probably in early December. So pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Wednesday, September 18th, 2024, the committee shall resume its study on the protection of freedom of expression. And we'll get to the guests in a moment. Mr. Shampoo, you would like to bring up a topic here that needs to be brought up.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Puis en tout,
Thank you, Chair. And I apologize to the witnesses, but I think we need to take a couple of minutes, Mr. Chair, to look into the calendar for the committee. I have some concerns. Given the way things are going, we might not be able to meet our deadlines and complete the work that we have previously agreed upon. That is to say, this very study on the freedom of speech that we are working on today. But we also have an order from the House to look into the financing or definancing of the CBC. So I'd like to ask you, Mr. Chair, what the order would be apart from next week, but because I believe next week we are going to be working on the CBC file with Ms. Tate and Ms. Bouchard, and then the week after we won't have too much time left for the two studies and the many meetings that are still pending, because it's getting hard to get a hold of witnesses for our study. And today, again, we seem to have lost a witness for technical reasons, so that also will add up to the backlog. So I just want to make sure, Mr. Chair, that we will be able to fit into the remaining time we have all the work that we will do on the freedom of expression study, but also the order from the House on CBC. So I think given next week we are going to go by the availability of Ms. Tate and Ms. Bouchard, the week after, and maybe the clerk can give us a hint on that, we could maybe have two meetings of 3 hours each, Monday and Wednesday. And if that is the case, I absolutely want us to work on, at least dedicate one of the 3-hour meetings to the freedom of expression study, either on Monday or on Wednesday. But I think we have to make progress on this, because otherwise we will not meet our deadlines.
Mr. Shampoo, so going forward, committee, next week on Monday, we will have Catherine Tate from the CBC here. And so that meeting, of course, will take place here at 11 o'clock. Is it a 2-hour meeting or 3? It's a 2-hour meeting. So next Monday from 11 to 1, we will have the CEO of CBC, Catherine Tate, as expected, here for the full 2 hours. Then on the Wednesday, the 27th, as expected, and this is the only date she can come, is the new incoming CEO of CBC, Marie-Philippe Bouchard, and she will be here for the full 2 hours next week. So Monday we will have Tate. And on Wednesday, we'll have Philippe Bouchard. What Mr. Shampoo has talked about is the week after, in December. So the House, as you know, has requested that we bring forward the CBC. And on December 2nd, then, which is a Monday, we have 3 hours set aside for witnesses dealing with the CBC. That is on the Monday. The expert witnesses on the Monday, December 2nd. And then on the 4th, we would then do a number of things. On the 4th, we can give the drafting instructions and recommendations on the 4th very quickly, and then go to the protection of freedom and expression. That is a 3-hour meeting scheduled on Wednesday, December 4th. We are going to need a short report on the CBC. It is the wishful thinking that on the 4th of December, we would spend about 15 minutes prior to the freedom of expression to give the drafting instructions and the recommendations on that day. And then the following week, on December 9th, which is the Monday, we need considerations and the adoption of the CBC for it can go forward on that week to the House of Commons as it was instructed earlier. So, Mr. Shampoo.
Ouais, ben ça me rend pas particulièrement de bonne humeur, Monsieur le Président.
Well, I have been of good faith across this during this autumn, and we pushed this study, and we find ourselves towards the end of the year, short of time. We might not be able to finish this study, but all of the parties here actually made the engagement to do this work. So this doesn't put me in a very good mood, as it were, for the upcoming meetings. So we could add. We asked to add a meeting Monday afternoon, but we did not receive any answer on that, and that could have been easily accepted, and that would have allowed us to do the work that's before us. But now we'll find ourselves with a surprise and the uncertainty as to the content of upcoming works. I understand the work of the analysts is very important, and we want to give them every tool possible, but we also suggested that we could have changed things in terms of the number of hours and number of meetings so that we wouldn't have the stress of being able to finish this freedom of expression study that we had all made the promise of finishing. But I will leave it at that, Mr. Chair, because we have witnesses here today with us. But I think we need to also start talking about the suggestion of adding a Monday afternoon meeting after the morning meeting so that we can make progress.
The other option, too, Mr. Shampoo, is on the 11th. We have extended hours on the Wednesday. Okay? That's another option. Okay? Mr. Noor Mohammed.
Monsieur le Président, alors nous sommes d'accord avec Monsieur Shampoo.
Thank you, Chair. We agree with Mr. Shampoo. We need to be able to finish our work as soon as possible. This is a question to the analysts, though. So you will need to draft the report and have it translated within a couple of days? Is that even possible? Well, that is the question.
That will be a short report, you know. Less between 500 words and 750 words.
So we don't want to shortchange the quality of the report unless we think that is sufficient. So I guess then the question becomes, how do we manage the time such that they have the time to do it justice? I mean, a 6-meeting study and a 500-word report doesn't seem like it's.
We'll just go to Mr. Courik and then Mr. Shampoo again, if you don't mind. Mr. Courik, please.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and and certainly just need to ensure that we try to coordinate as many pieces together. I know today would have been happy to have 3 hours and two witness blocks, but just as a note to try and work together and to the benefit of the analysts. Be happy to explore, the deadlines for dissenting reports, and if there's any feedback needed, we could have all that stuff figured out beforehand to make sure that we can, in fact, work within the tight timelines. And I think a short report to ensure that what is is required by the House order would certainly be trust the analysts to make sure they can encompass what that looks like, and then can just try to coordinate those different things happening all at once. I think it's possible, but extended time I think is entirely reasonable, and it'd sure be nice to have a little more notice than the notice going out at 7:51 the night before in terms of demands on the clerk and analysts and staff. I think certainly if we can forecast some of those things a little bit ahead of time, and two, just ensuring we have a great panel today, which I'm looking forward to getting to shortly, but to make sure that we get the high caliber witnesses that I know both of these studies demand would be important to have a little bit more lead time and planning on that.
Mr. Couric, Mr. Shampoo now.
Je vais conclure rapidement, Monsieur le Président.
Well, I'll make this quick, Mr. Chair. What Mr. Nur Mohammed was saying is completely true, and we have known this for weeks, and we came up with a suggestion so that we could do more hours starting from this week. We could have done 2 more hours last Monday. We had the resources. But it's kind of a shame that we find ourselves at this point asking ourselves how we can work faster, all the while allowing the analysts to do their work. But we had suggested last week, and had we gone by that suggestion, we would have made headway, and we would have had more progress done at this point. So we still have next Monday. We can add a meeting in the afternoon in addition to the 3-hour meeting in the morning, so that we can give the analysts the time.
Shampoo, I think that, talking with the clerk this week, she has had real difficulty getting people to come to whatever the reason is, getting all parties, getting their people in front of us. Some were committed last Friday, and then all of a sudden Monday they dropped out. We've had one today drop out because of technical reasons. So, the clerk has tried, and is it the wish that we have an additional 3-hour meeting on Monday then? First of all, is it possible? I'll ask the clerk that, and I'll shut the mic off because you may not want to hear the answer. Okay, so the clerk is willing to see if there's additional resources for Monday, which would be the 25th of November. Is that the will of the committee, that we not only have Catherine Tate here for 2 hours, but we would have an additional up to 3 hours with the freedom of expression on Monday if there is resources and if the clerk can get enough witnesses to come back for this? So I'm open for suggestions here. How about the Liberals? NDP? Matthew? Welcome, Matthew.
Mr. Chair, I'm always remiss to, support assigning more work to my colleague, but I'm to understand that she would be okay with that.
Good. Mr. Nur Mohammed, we've kind of come to a consensus on this side, about over there, that if the clerk can find resources and get maybe 2 to 3 hours additional for a committee meeting, are you in favor of that?
I would have no problem with that. I think we need to just do the math on whether or not it gives us enough time for Mr. Shampoo's study, and let's do the math. Look, we're fine with it. If it works, great. But let's just work backwards to make sure we have met the requirements of all of these pieces. But on principle, we have no issue with a 3-hour meeting on Monday.
So Monday with Ms. Tate, it's 2 hours that we have from 11 to 1. If we can get extra resources, we could go up to 3 hours, as long as we get enough people forward, right? No? Go ahead, Mr. Shampoo.
Je pense que, Monsieur le Président, si on veut faire les choses...
Chair, if we want to do things correctly, I think we will need to do 2 meetings, because I don't see us doing 2 hours with Ms. Tate and then reorganize the room to welcome witnesses for an hour. I don't think it would be very efficient. I think we would need to add another meeting after QP in the afternoon, 2 or 3-hour meeting.
In the afternoon? 2 and 2? Fine.
Then? 2 and 2. Okay. Okay. So is that fine, that we ask Danielle to kind of see if there's resources for an afternoon meeting? that maybe take place 4:30 to 6:30, or if we can, even to 7:30. Matthew. Yeah, so Monday, on the 25th, we will have Catherine Tate here from 11 to 1. And then in the afternoon, depending on resources after QP, we probably could go 4:30 to 6:30 or 4:30 to 7:30, depending on freedom of expression, if, in fact, Danielle can get the resources. And we can get our list into her so that we can get people in front of us. That has been an issue. Okay? All good? Okay. Any other instructions you need? There we are. We're good. Well, welcome, everyone. I would like to, we do have witnesses in front of us here today. Thank you both for coming. As an individual, we have Stéphane Séraphin, the Assistant Professor, University of Ottawa. Welcome. And then we have Media Smarts. Catherine Hill, the Executive Director, along with Matthew Johnson, Director of Education. So you will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks, after which we will open the floor to questions. We will start first with Mr. Séraphin for 5 minutes, and when you're done, and then we're going to go to Media Smarts for 5 minutes, and then we'll open the floor for questions and answers, if you don't mind. So, Mr. Séraphin, lead us off for 5 minutes, please.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. So my name is Stéphane Séraphin. I am currently an assistant professor at the University of Ottawa, Faculty of Law, Common Law section, but I'm speaking here in my own personal capacity, so my views are my own and not those of my employer. So when I was first asked to speak before this committee, I found the framing somewhat odd. So I was asked to contribute to a discussion, and this I'm quoting from the invitation, regarding the protection of freedom of expression and the means the government should have at its disposal to ensure its exercise. While there are always things the government can do to advance freedom of expression, most of what came to mind to me were instances in which government action had recently served to undermine it, sometimes significantly. So I could cite many examples, but I'll limit myself to areas within federal jurisdiction. And two come to mind here. The first, it relates to my own experience as a university professor, and it relates to government funding of research that increasingly prioritizes so-called equity, diversity, and inclusion requirements over other concerns, so to the exclusion of other concerns. In the university context, federal funding agencies have for some time now created special funding categories for DEI-oriented projects. And they have increasingly, perhaps more concerningly, increasingly mandated compliance or a commitment to DEI as a requirement of obtaining funding. Now, on the face of it, equity, diversity, and inclusion sound neutral, uncontestable. But everybody, more or less agrees with equity in the sense of fairness. Everybody agrees, more or less, with the value of diversity and the value of inclusion. But beneath these labels are hidden ideological commitments, commitments to a particular understanding of what equity means, what it means to treat people fairly, what a particular understanding of what diversity means and the particular types of diversity that are valued, and so on with inclusion as well. To the extent, then, that these requirements are imposed in the context of funding, now it's not straight-up censorship, but it does incentivize research to take on particular orientations and provides a strong disincentive for research to adopt alternative orientations, including orientations that might challenge or somehow criticize the premises of the EDI commitments. So that's the first area of concern. The second is more directly pertinent to Canada's democratic culture. It relates to certain bills that are now currently before Parliament in particular that would serve to impose, regulate speech in a way that is not necessarily content neutral, and worse yet, may criminalize or impose sanctions on the expression of factually true statements to the extent that they are considered inconvenient for the advancement of certain political causes. So the two bills that I have in mind here are Bill C-413, which is the private members bill that would, it's titled, tentatively, an act to amend the criminal code, promotion of hatred against Indigenous peoples. Now, the bill itself, most people would oppose hate speech. There's a particular concerning aspect of this bill in that it aims to target as hate speech, or at least it could be interpreted as such, any conduct or any expression of any public expression of views that condone, deny, or downplay the effects of the Indian residential school system. Now, the concerning aspect here is that these words, condones, denies, downplays, and justifies, are all value judgments. We are here touching on the core of political expression, the core of democratic life in this country. So to the extent that we are publicly, anybody who might inject publicly a bit of nuance in this sense might suppose to raise factually true statements could find themselves criminalized. The last one I want to raise is the Online Harms Bill, Bill C-63. And particularly the provisions that would add jurisdiction to the Human Rights Tribunal to prosecute hate speech complaints against individuals online. So this here is a civil complaints process that also raises significant chilling effects, in part because here, unlike the other bill, it's not a criminal act, it's not a criminal sanction, and so it could be prosecuted at the instigation of private actors as well. Thank you. Look forward to your question.
Very much, Mr. Serafin. We're going to move now to media smarts. I think, Catherine Hill, you're going to maybe speak first. You, even though you've got Mr. Johnson with you, it's only 5 minutes, your opening comments, so please go forward with that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, members of the committee. Thank you for the invitation to speak with you today. My name is Catherine Hill, and I'm proud to serve as the Executive Director of Media Smarts. I'm joined today by our Director of Education, Matthew Johnson. While I'll be making our remarks, Matthew, who's our resident expert, will join me in responding to questions. Media Smarts is Canada's Centre for Digital Media Literacy. We're a not-for-profit, charitable organization, and our vision is that all people in Canada are empowered to engage with media confidently and critically. To achieve this goal, we advance digital media literacy through world-class research, education, public engagement, and outreach. Digital media literacy is essential to an informed and engaged populace and electorate. Canada is especially in need of a coordinated approach that moves beyond an only access and skills-based understanding of digital media literacy. Each of the 4 competencies of digital media literacy, so the ability to access, to use, to understand, and to engage with media of all kinds, is essential to freedom of expression. In a digital environment, both our thoughts and our actions are influenced by the design of the tools we use, whether that's a recommendation algorithm that preferentially feeds us outrage-provoking content, or a user interface that prompts us to react without thinking. At Media Smarts, we believe, based on our own research and work done around the world, that these 3 things are true. People should be free to express their opinions online. However, there are circumstances where limits on online speech are warranted, for example, if it endangers or harms others. And we need to educate people on how to have respectful and responsible dialogue online. While most people would agree there are circumstances where limits on online speech are warranted, we believe, and research shows, that promoting digital media literacy education is a complementary approach that is less intrusive and more likely to foster freedom of expression. It was taken for granted that networked media would be a boon for freedom of thought and expression and would democratize access to media creation and distribution. And the past decade has shown that censorship can take less overt forms. For example, when members of marginalized groups are kept silent in online spaces for fear of harassment, or the tactic, just one of many, known as the heckler's veto, where points of view are drowned out by harassment, abuse, and then amplified by the algorithms. Another impact of digital media on free expression is polarization. While research suggests that Canadians are actually not deeply polarized, media, and specifically digital media, such as social networks, make us believe that we are. The result of this false polarization is that when we try to engage with someone online, we start by assuming they hold more extreme views than they probably do, and that they are more hostile towards us than they actually are. And this threatens freedom of expression, because if we believe people on the other side of an issue hold extreme views, we are less likely to engage with them in reasonable discussion. So that's why we not only educate young people on how to shape the social norms of their online communities, we also teach them how to spot arguments that are based in hate and how to tell these hateful arguments apart from real debates. And we help them to learn how to question their own beliefs and assumptions. Civic engagement is happening online, so it's more vital than ever to ensure that all Canadians have the skills, the knowledge, and the understanding needed to be ethical digital citizens. It is not sufficient to teach these skills only to young people. The constantly changing nature of technology and the media ecosystem makes lifelong learning essential. Whether our primary concern is disinformation, hate speech and harassment, or polarization, a strong commitment to digital media literacy and education is necessary to ensure freedom of expression is balanced with critical thinking and positive civic engagement. We need a media literate populace that can identify cases where regulation and legislation are appropriate, and that can understand why the legislation or regulation may be critical to protecting human rights. While the internet has not turned out to be the utopia for free thought and expression that was once promised, it has nevertheless become where our politics and our lives happen. We cannot cede this space to those who promote hate and deliberately spread disinformation, nor do we want to see heavy-handed limits on freedom of thought and expression. By prioritizing digital media literacy, we can create a more informed, respectful, and engaged society, ensuring that the internet remains a space for free and meaningful expression for all Canadians.
Thank you, Ms. Hill, for those comments. The first round, as always, 6 minutes. We'll start with the Conservative Party and Mr. Gord. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci aux témoins d'être là aujourd'hui.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to thank the witnesses today. This is a very vast area of study when we talk about the freedom of expression, but we're also talking about the limits of the freedom of expression, because, of course, there could be so many differences between individuals when it comes to the freedom of expression. And a young child, for instance, is more transparent. They might say whatever they think without thinking that, on the other hand, it might please or displease others. But we can also, find out in different ways that what we say isn't always nice to hear for others. So that becomes a factor when we are saying certain things. But can we introduce a framework or limits to the freedom of expression? Is there an ideal framework? Maybe ideal doesn't really exist in our world, but how would you go about introducing that kind of a framework, and how would you do it?
Oui, les deux.
Whoever wants to go first.
One of the reasons why we promote digital media literacy as a response is because it is so difficult to determine what are the appropriate limits of free expression, and because, as we noted in our remarks, most people, I think, feel that the number of cases where expression should be regulated by law should be few. And what our research has found is that the more young people, and we believe people in general, are empowered to shape the social norms of their own spaces, empowered to speak out, both to speak out to express themselves, but also to speak out to, in response to expression they feel is inappropriate for their spaces, then the less we need to rely on law or regulation. With that being said, we also do know that the youth in our study do appreciate having that as a recourse. So we know, for instance, in cases of cyberbullying, a vanishingly small number are likely to turn to law enforcement or indeed any kind of authority in the first incident, but with each attempt to resolve it that fails, they're more and more likely to turn to authorities such as teachers, and with enough failed attempts, significantly likely to turn to police. So it is important to have that sanction available. It is important to the youth in our study that law be available as a tool, but we also know that in general they don't want to turn to it unless there is any other option. And we also know that they want to have more opportunities to speak out both on their own right and in response to speech they consider inappropriate in their spaces.
C'est un enjeu difficile.
Well, it's certainly difficult. It's complicated because in all other areas of law, we can talk about legislation or the laws without going down to the fundamentals. We can have that debate. We can have that discussion. So in a public forum, what are the elements on which we can focus is the question. But the challenge we're currently facing is that we are faced with a more subjective perception of what is or what constitutes harm. And I don't really have an answer as to what an ideal or absolute framework would be, but we need to resist the urge to react whenever we find something we don't like and think immediately that that is something that should be admonished. And we need to rely on more objective criteria to find the right balance between the freedom of expression of people and the rights and liberties of others. Violence, for instance, falls outside of this framework. If you are inciting people to commit acts of violence, then I think we can all agree that we have reached the limit of freedom of expression. For me, this would be part of an ideal framework if we could find one. But otherwise, if we are dealing with more subjective parameters on social media networks, that is not very cut and dry.
Avec l'intelligence artificielle.
So with artificial intelligence, we are seeing videos, fake videos, and people can be made to be saying things that they have actually never said. So does fake news constitute a threat to the freedom of expression? If I can take the next 45 seconds. Well, it's maybe not the freedom of expression that is under attack. We can regulate that. Of course, it can border the freedom of expression in some contexts, depending on how it's used. And in those cases, you can introduce certain limits with regulation. But otherwise, it would be usually other rights that will be impacted rather than the freedom of expression. If you can provide the written answer, I think I'm out of...
To the minutes, Mr. Noor Mohammed, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being with us. Professor Séraphin, I was interested in your statement, and I'm curious if you can walk me through, because I actually think what you're talking about provokes a series of interesting questions, particularly as it relates to the notion of freedom and the way in which we deal with expression. You have seen the good and the bad of conversations on campus. I've read some of your work. And campuses have become a very interesting place for debate and discussion the last little while. Briefly, I would like your honest opinion about what we hear as polarizing natures of conversation. We have Jewish students who feel like they can't speak their mind. We have Palestinian students who are supporting the Palestinian cause, saying that they feel like their freedoms are being stifled in expression. And in all of this, we are grappling with communities that are hurting, that are angry, that are frustrated. At what point does this whole notion of freedom particularly of expression, becomes something that we need to be looking at differently? Or is that actually, or are those debates and discussions and those confrontations healthy for our democracy?
Part of this is going to depend on the sort of values you bring to it. So if we're committed to pluralism, if we're committed to democracy, which I think most people here, or everybody probably should be, but if we are, then we have very difficult conversations to have, especially the questions of Jewish and Palestinian groups, or Israel and pro-Palestine groups on campus has been a very difficult issue for universities. And there's two approaches you could take to this. You could take a heavy-handed approach, and you could also take an approach that, so one of the concerns I would have, say, with the online harms bill, the groups that are most likely to weaponize this are actually both of those groups in particular, at least in the current context. So the moment that that provision comes into effect, if it comes into effect, I would anticipate a number of complaints filed by Jewish groups and by pro-Palestine groups on both sides. And I would suggest that having this mechanism, requiring the state to kind of decide these disputes as an expression of hate on the one side or the other, is not a healthy approach to resolving these issues. There needs to be more means-based, I would suggest, approaches to dealing with these issues. So, for example, on-campus protests, should be permitted, but we should also recognize that there are limits to what on-campus protests can do.
So, I mean, this is kind of where I was getting at. If you look at the notion of limits, then, right? I mean, this goes to the question of, you talked about language earlier that is arbitrary. Someone gets to be the arbiter of that. How do we decide, or who gets to decide what is the arbiter of reasonableness? Because different colleges and universities had different accordions of where they see what is appropriate and what is not. And I actually tend to agree with you. I think that on campus it's really important for us to create environments where people can have very thoughtful, healthy debates. And if we take that away from young people and we don't create the environments where they can have those conversations in a thoughtful, meaningful way, I think it can have profoundly negative impacts, not just on their learning, but I think on society at large. So I'd love your thoughts on how you think about limits in that context.
Yeah, so the problem of who decides is a fundamental problem. All these terms, regardless of what you put in the statute, always has to be interpreted by someone. So what I would suggest, right, is if you want to avoid needlessly polarizing these debates, words like, or using hate speech, for example, as a concept to police what people can and cannot do, is probably not the appropriate way of doing it. No one likes to have their political views labeled hateful. Okay? Especially when they're expressing views that are held by, in some cases, a plurality or a majority of Canadians. To have those views labeled hateful is something that leads to needless polarization. If you want to resolve these issues in a healthy way, then things like, for example, restricting who can use public spaces in a neutral way, in a viewpoint neutral way, would be a preferable solution.
So let's talk then about workplaces. What would you say to people who are being told by their managers that we're going to monitor what you say, we're going to check on what you say to make sure that we're okay with it, and we're not going to let you say certain things or express your concerns or your advocacy for something in a certain way? What would you say to people in those workplaces?
I mean, it depends on the workplace. Fundamentally, this is a question of what's relevant to the workplace. If it's essential to maintaining a collegial workplace that certain views not be discussed in the workplace, then there's a legitimate cause for the employer to do that. Now, it depends on what type of position is involved. Like as an academic, right, the expectations for me are different than they are for someone who works a standard office job.
What about for elected officials?
Well, I think that for elected officials, generally speaking, you should have fairly broad discretion in what you can say.
So would you say that a leader of a political party should say to their members of parliament, we're going to monitor every word you say and we're going to punish you if you say something, or you cannot advocate on behalf of your communities? Would you say that's a reasonable thing for them to do, or do you think that stifles their freedom of expression?
Well, that's a legitimate decision for a political leader to make, insofar as, like, I'm not privy to the internal conversations. I'm assuming that they've decided, for all sorts of reasons, that they would prefer to have these conversations internally rather than airing them in the public sphere. It's a decision, a political decision.
Do you agree with it?
I don't disagree with it. I don't think there's an issue in principle with it, so long as the members, like if the members feel like they're in conscience unable to tolerate this, then they can always just decide to leave caucus, right? This is...
So,
I've got to move on.
Okay,
It's
thank you.
6:13. I know you were. Mr. Shampoo for the... Yeah. Go ahead, Mr. Shampoo, for 6.
Monsieur le Président, merci. Pendant
Mr. Chair, thank you. I thought my colleague, Mr. Nur Mohammed, was rather referring to the revenue agency, the CRA, when he was saying that if a boss could decide what the employees can or cannot say in a context as the one that we are talking about these days at the CRA, whistleblowers, employees who signaled cases of fraud and mismanagement. I mean, do you think that is it appropriate for the managers of the agency to muzzle employees in this kind of a setting? Is this behavior that we can defend?
C'est une question difficile également.
Well, it's a very tough question because we have two contradicting obligations: the duty of the employer and the public nature of the work, the public service, so serving the public at large. Well, at the abstract level, I don't really have an opinion on these questions. It's a complicated situation. I would need to think more to answer your question. Well, I would invite you to do that, and maybe you could provide your observations or an opinion in writing. It would be really interesting to have your opinion on that. But I'm going to now turn towards Ms. Hill and Mr. Johnson from Media Smarts. I am very happy to have met you today. And online safety goes through education and literacy, in which I think is what you defend. Well, I'll ask my question a little ironically, if you will. How many years of delay do we have in terms of media literacy education?
I would be hesitant to say how many years behind we are. I can reflect that Canada as a country is behind other nations. And we know this because most of the other industrialized nations in the world, the European Union and Australia, South America, the Middle East, they have digital media literacy education strategies for the country, for their nation. They've identified and developed these strategies. Some have been in place for 20, 30 years, some as recently as the past 5 years, and they have made amazing progress in the past 5 years. The United Kingdom, for example, implemented their strategy 5 years ago, and they've had spectacular results in terms of building the education levels and the resilience of their citizens. So we are definitely behind.
Je vais vous poser ma question d'une autre façon.
Well, I'll ask the question in a different way in this case, because I was reading recently that Finland did not have a disinformation issue. Well, it wasn't rather the target of Russians in terms of disinformation or foreign interference, simply because they have a media literacy education program starting from the very young ages. So how long would it take us if we start today to protect ourselves against threats from a rogue country such as Russia, for instance? Do we have the time?
Absolutely. It's never too late to start. Absolutely, 100%. And many of us look to Finland for their example. They have been doing this work for 30-some years. And appropriately so, because of where they're located and what was propaganda that became false news, fake news, misinformation, disinformation. But if we look to, as I just said, the United Kingdom, they started 5 years ago, and they have made tremendous progress. And they are starting now to be able to measure the actual levels of media literacy in their population. So it is possible it doesn't need to take us 20 years. If we can dedicate the resources, we can do this.
En fait, on peut commencer par les enfants, mais il faudrait aussi éduquer les adultes.
So we can start with children, but we have to also educate adults. They seem to be behind.
Success is that it's lifelong learning, and so we have learned that. We used to focus only on children and youth in the education system. That is no longer acceptable. It must be lifelong. So they're starting before kindergarten, and they're going all the way through to senior citizens' homes, continually, consistently.
Fantastique. Monsieur Serra.
Great. Mr. Serafin, you referred to some criteria. Well, we're not against that. I mean, everyone likes the right values, the good values, equality, diversity, inclusion. We agree with the principle. But many people, including myself, disagree with the idea of positive discrimination because, in my opinion, no discrimination can be positive. Could we hit the targets in terms of diversity and inclusion without absolutely introducing restrictions that penalize other groups that have also been defavorized? Well, my answer will be yes, but we would need to set out what the objectives are, because one of the problems with these criteria is that we're told diversity, equality, inclusion, without really specifying what these refer to, because there's usually an idea behind these beyond the commitment to EDI. There's something else, but it's usually not explicitly laid out. So before everything else, tell us what the objectives really are that you are trying to achieve, and then we can have a debate on the different means that could be used to reach these objectives. Because if you want to have a certain diversified representation of different groups that represents the Canadian society, and this might be something we want to see in all sectors of economy, but tell us that that's your objective.
6:15, actually. We'll go to the New Democratic Party. Mr. Green, welcome to Heritage. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. And of course, welcome to Catherine and Matthew, who've both attended the Ethics Committee and presented on disinformation and misinformation. I'm going to put a series of questions to you in this round. I want you to know that you can speak with candor at this committee. Don't feel like you have to protect yourself as a nonprofit. We really look for the vigor of your response. And I want to just begin by your organization. You've been educating people on this for quite some time. In fact, if I recall, at ETHI, you gave us 2 recommendations. One, that parliamentarians become educated and have digital literacy. And the second was that you said for 15 to 20 years, you've been after this government and the government before to implement media literacy as you've described in your opening remarks. And I you know, I'm reflecting on that, and I'm thinking about how much of a difference that would have made if we'd started this work 20 years ago, given to where we're at in this moment, particularly as it relates to disinformation. I'm going to draw a comparison here, and I want you to follow along with me. In the United States, there was a shock jock, Alex Jones, in InfoWars, and his whole outlet was about basically flooding the zone, or as Steve Bannon would call it, cognitive warfare on the truth, on the public discourse for a far-right agenda. And in that far-right agenda, he used his platform to disparage the victims of Sandy Hook and called them crisis actors and was sued. A substantial lawsuit that ultimately bankrupted his entire operation. In the defense of that, though, his lawyers came out and said no reasonable person should have thought that what he was actually saying was the truth. In an age that is beyond objective truth and facts and journalism, how harmful is that kind of cognitive warfare on the public when it relates to flooding the zone with misinformations, and then in a legal context, in a very specific context-specific setting, you just go ahead and your lawyers say, oh, he didn't really mean it.
We really can't speak to the legal context. That's outside of our area. But obviously, we do believe that disinformation and conspiracy theories can do tremendous harm. Even if they don't do harm with the specific content, we know that they do harm to the public discourse and, as a result, free expression, because they weaken our common sense of reality. We know, for instance, returning to the question of deepfakes that was raised earlier, one of the biggest concerns about deepfakes is not necessarily that people will be fooled by them, but rather what's called the liar's dividend, that the existence of deepfakes allows people to claim that they didn't say or do things that they actually did, but also that it allows us as individuals to not believe something is true if we don't want to believe that it's true.
That's an important point, because I would put to you that in politics there's a liar's dividend. And I'll give you another example. And again, in this age of disinformation, I think it's safe to say that, as I would ask you, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but would you not agree that elected officials or government officials have a much higher duty of honesty, candor, and truth? Would you agree with that statement?
We agree that all people who hold public office, that all public figures are looked to be leaders. And so it's important, yes.
And would you not agree that statements made by government and political actors ought to maintain with it a high standard of truth, particularly when it comes to government policy?
I think we can say from the research that's available that when people who are seen as leaders spread mis or disinformation, it is more likely to be taken as true by people who see them as leaders or authorities.
And yet, without taking a far leap, I'm going to put to you another example. It's the example of clean drinking water. The Liberal government promised that there would be clean drinking water, and yet right now in court, their lawyers are basically arguing that these utterances are just context specific and not something that anybody should believe. So when federal lawyers have to stand up in court and say, no, Liberal ministers can't be believed, does this not undermine and erode kind of the fundamental principles of democracy and trust in our system?
I'm not sure we can really speak to that specific example.
Could you speak to an example where a liar's dividends, whether it's at campaign time or as part of a public-facing communications campaign, that says one thing in the public and then legally argues something completely different, is in fact a form of disinformation and misinformation?
It's not been identified by the research as a form of disinformation or misinformation, so it's not something that we've
Would it fit in the liar's dividend?
I think that what needs to be paid attention to is the intention. And so, that deliberate intention knowingly to deceive.
Yes, as argued by the lawyers in court. I do appreciate that. I'll go on to another example because we have many. Is there 30 seconds?
30 left.
Well, that doesn't feel like enough runway. Do you believe in the concept of hate speech?
Yes.
Do you believe in the concept of Section 1 of the Charter, which is a reasonable limit to freedom of expression?
Yes.
Would you agree that denial of the Holocaust is a form of hate speech?
It's not an area that I would.
Mr. Serafin,
Yeah.
do you believe that the denial of the Holocaust is a form of hate speech?
Quickly.
I'm not sure.
Please expand on that.
Well, he can in the next round. We're already at 6:15. Thank you. So we'll do the second round. We'll do 5 minutes from the Conservatives, 5 from the Liberals, then 2.5 for the Bloc and the NDP. And we're going to conclude the second round with a 5-minute Conservative, 5 Liberals, and then we'll call it a day. Okay, so we'll do, this is the second round, and then after that we will be on our way. So, Mr. Giovanni, for 5 minutes, Conservative Party, away you go.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Some questions for you, Professor Serafin. So, many Canadians express great concern over Justin Trudeau's censorship agenda. And Bill C-63 is a piece of legislation that is part of that agenda. You've written about that bill for the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, and I'd like to ask you in particular about one of your comments, just to elaborate on it. You wrote in reference to Bill C-63, it is not inconceivable that remedies might be sought against other kinds of online content distributors in an effort to have them engage in proactive censorship or otherwise set general policy with little or no democratic oversight. This possibility is certainly heightened by the way in which the existing directed remedies for anti-discrimination have been used to date. Could you elaborate on that point?
Yeah, so the main example of this is, so I talked about the EDI stuff in higher education earlier. There's also the Canada Research Chairs program, which is subject currently to a rather strict quota system. Which I think was subject to controversy like a year or two ago. And actually, that quota system is the result of a Canadian Human Rights Tribunal settlement. That was, the Human Rights Tribunal settlement essentially consecrated an agreement between the government and the plaintiffs in that human rights complaint, which had as an effect to completely overturn the entire way in which the Canada Research Chairs are awarded. So now there's a strict quota system in place because of that. So it's not inconceivable. What my suggestion was there are some provisions in the wording of the proposed amendments, so Bill C-63, that would suggest that orders against content distributors in and of themselves are off the table, but that's a question of interpretation. And it's not inconceivable in that context that there would be a possibility of an order against someone who is found to be doing more than just distributing content to proactively adopt certain measures to, for example, prevent marginalized voices as they are conceived from being censored, which would maybe mean censoring other voices instead. So those are the kinds of things that I had in mind when I was writing that.
Do you empathize with Canadians who have concern over the centralization of power and control in federal bureaucracies over what people can see, hear, and say online?
Yes. I mean, ultimately, I think that it's a question of what Parliament intended, right? Parliament can intend a broad delegation of authority to, say, the Human Rights Tribunal. It's perfectly legitimate. So I'm not one of the people who would deny the legitimacy of administrative law writ large. But that said, there are trade-offs involved. If you're going to delegate to regulation-making bodies or administrative decision-makers, then you are necessarily undercutting the sort of representative nature of the legislative process. So these decisions, for example, the Canada Research Chairs program, going back to that, right? This is a decision that was made with no public consultation, and that turned out to be quite controversial. So the public wasn't even aware of this. In fact, I don't think most people know that how this settlement came about at all. They're not even aware of the case. So that's kind of the issue with these kinds of measures.
Yeah, I'll put forward an example to you of where someone like Justin Trudeau having so much power to decide what would be objectionable to say online could be problematic. You may recall that in 2018, it went viral that a lady in Quebec had expressed concerns over immigration policies, and Justin Trudeau called her racist. And you fast forward now to 2024, and Justin Trudeau is now admitting that those policies are bad for our country, has not called himself racist for admitting that. And it gives a very clear example of where the definition of these kind of things can be easily politicized and why centralizing that kind of power and control in the hands of a federal government could be a problem. What would you say to that?
I mean, it's not just limited to government oversight, right? So this is a broader issue with the way that these words like racists and all the other epithets you can think of are used in like the social media context. It's completely arbitrary in a lot of cases. One day it's okay to say something, the next day it's not okay to say something. And so I would suggest that it's not even just a function of centralization in government bureaucracies, although removing the kind of public oversight creates additional risks perhaps. But just the way that these things change for no apparent reason presents, I think, significant risks to, say, banning hate speech. What counts as hate speech can change from one day to the next.
Well, I think we're low on time, but I would say that I think your testimony, your writing, I think affirms why so many Canadians are concerned about what we're seeing from Justin Trudeau and the Liberal government. And certainly with Bill C-63, you raise a lot of important considerations that need to be made and speak to why Canadians are so unhappy with what's happening right now. So thank you.
Thank you. We go to the Liberals for 5 minutes. Mr. Koto.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. Media Smart, you're doing great work. This is much needed work. I think just the advancement of digital literacy and digital media literacy is so necessary today, and I appreciate the work you're doing. I was the executive director of a national literacy organization called Alpha Plus. We did a lot of work just on digital literacy with the essential skills, and And back then the main conversation was around how do you give people the tools to really move within the digital world. And now the complexity has grown so much. It's like not only move within it, but to find out what actually is real in that maze that presents himself to you. You spoke, Ms. Hill, you spoke about the algorithm. The algorithms that are out there today, and we actually did a lot of studying on this as a committee with the big tech companies and algorithms and how they're used, and they're hidden as code that really we still don't understand as a society how they work. We can kind of figure out some things, but does the algorithm itself create censorship? Is there an argument that's out there? It doesn't have to be your opinion, but is there a discussion happening about that the algorithm itself creates censorship and limits our ability to express ourselves?
We do have evidence that recommendation algorithms lead to self-censorship because one of the things that they do is they favor certain content and they will downrank or shadow ban other content. This is not transparent to users, to people who are participating on these platforms. And so in many cases, people will be particularly cautious to avoid using terms that they think might have them downranked. Sometimes they will use so-called algo speak, which is a code word that people in the community know stands for a particular word that they expect will get them downranked. But of course, this means that people who are not yet members of the community don't have access to that conversation. And we also know that even in creating content, particularly people who are commercial content creators, they feel a very strong pressure to create not necessarily the content that they want to express, but content that will be favored by the algorithm.
That's so. And do you have an example of that? Have there been big examples of where that algorithm has led specific individuals to being pushed down and their voice quieted online? Or?
So we do know that there were cases where discussion of certain topics, such as sexual violence, is believed to be downranked, and where that algo speak was developed to be able to talk about it. Discussion of sexual orientation and gender identity is believed to be downranked on some apps. Again, I say believed because we don't know because of the lack of transparency, and in many cases, even the people who operate these platforms don't necessarily know because these are not programmed algorithms, they're machine learning algorithms that are trained on data sets. And so they can very easily encode existing biases without their operators even necessarily being aware or intending to do so.
What age demographic do you work with? Is it right across the board, or do you focus a little bit more on young people?
We focus a little more heavily on young people, partly because that's what we've always done. It's also because, of course, schools are a ready-made way of reaching or getting our material to people. We also know that parents play a tremendously important role. Our research has shown that again and again. But increasingly, we are developing programs and resources for the entire population.
Yeah. It's interesting. I remember even like 10, 12 years ago, the average screen time in Ontario for a young person was 5 hours, and that was considered really bad. And now it's like 12, 13 hours. It's and so there's a lot of information being downloaded into that child's brain, and it has a huge influence on their ability to navigate within society. If you were talking to a teacher today or to a parent, in regards to building someone's voice, a young person's voice, so they had the ability to express themselves, because suppressing expression is a big challenge within itself. What advice would you give a teacher or a parent when it comes to allowing that child's voice to fully develop so they can express themselves in the most meaningful way without those external influences pushing their or silencing their voice?
Quickly, please.
I would say it's important that young people be aware that the voice that seems like the majority in an online space or a media space often is not. We know that the loudest voices are often taken for the majority, but we also know that it takes a relatively small number of people speaking out to change what is seen as the majority or consensus view.
Thank you. Yep, thank you. We go to Mr. Shampoo, 2.5 minutes.
Merci. Monsieur Séraphin, on sait que...
Thank you, Mr. Serafin. We know that the right to be to being offensive doesn't really exist, and if we are to talk about the framework of the freedom of expression, we need to remind ourselves of that. But we have very small minorities who react very strongly to things that are said and that they find offensive. So can we find ourselves at a point where in a context of hypersensitivities, can we find ourselves at a point where legislation is modified in line with these sensitivities? Mr. Johnson was talking about that, people starting to self-censor because they think some things they might say might hurt some people, so they're walking on eggshells. So is it dangerous in a society to have this kind of pressure? Could that lead to legislative change that could, for instance, limit the basic principles of the freedom of speech? Yes. The answer is yes. And that is my main concern in this context, because in this current situation, hypersensitivities exist, and people, well, rather the main problem is that we have it used to be that I don't like what you're saying, but we have now transformed that into prejudice, and this seeps into private conversations as well, because something that's offensive, does that make someone feel bad, has now been transformed into something that's actually attacking someone. So that's very dangerous in terms of the freedom of expression. And this is something we have seen at universities or in the artistic field as well. There are creators and artists who have held back their works. So thank you very much on that, and I think I'm out of my time. Thank you very much.
20 seconds left.
20 secondes, j'ai le temps de remercier les...
20 seconds, okay. I will thank the witnesses for being with us today. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. 2.5 minutes to Matthew Green for the New Democratic Party.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Okay, I'll take debate. Mr. Serafin, let's not beat around the bush. Let's talk about University of Ottawa. Let's talk about freedom of expression. In your estimation, is the use of the N-word prejudice?
Simply stating it, I don't think is appropriate. No. That said, the idea that any word, like forget the cultural taboo around this word, right? The fundamental underlying problem here is the idea that a person will say that the mere utterance of a word, no matter the context, is somehow inappropriate and hold a veto right over other persons saying that word.
In your experience as an academic, had to use the word?
I have not.
Has it hampered you in any way?
That's not the point.
That's the question I'm asking you.
But the point is, has it hampered me? No, but I don't teach courses in which it would be relevant for me to use it. So the case that you're probably thinking of...
Do you believe that the use of that word in some context could be constituted as hate speech?
Well, if I use it to describe someone to their face, that absolutely it is.
So you're not a free speech
I'm not a free speech absolutist.
Okay, thank you. That's all there is for there.
Absolutely not.
Regarding the kind of the media landscape that we have, we know that mainstream media is actually the digital world now as well, but there seems to be an emergence I spoke about earlier with InfoWars and kind of far-right conspiracies and all these other things that are taking hold right now. In your estimation, how important is it to have a regulated media landscape that has accountability and journalistic standards?
I don't think we can speak to government regulation, but we can say that journalistic standards are a really key part of how we identify whether or not a source
Who's going to regulate them if not the government?
Where the standards come from is not something we have an opinion on. It's something that we educate people about. But we educate people about what the markers are of a source that is sufficiently reliable to be worth your attention, because there is so much information that comes to us all the time. Our initial task is always going to be
I'm going to reclaim my time because
separating.
15 seconds. On Monday, we heard from other experts who gave testimonies on how important truth-seeking trained journalists are to ensure our society is not being misled. And yet, we do have partisans who are attacking mainstream media, the validity of it. How dangerous is that in terms of gauging for the general public what is and what isn't true?
Quickly.
To Matthew's point, what we think is really critically important, and the luxury of, just absorbing what we hear or see no longer exists for any of us. And so we have to have the verification skills to be able to do that. It is unfortunate that's our current situation, but that is the current situation along with AI and deepfakes and everything else. And so we have to be vigilant as consumers of information, but it's also incredibly helpful to have standards.
Thank you, Mr. Courik. For the Conservatives, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for what has been a very, I think, productive conversation today. Professor Serafin, we've talked about Bill C-63, and one of the concerning aspects that I read when in that bill is because nobody disagrees with wanting to protect especially children from online harms, but the key is how you do it. And when in some of the language that is proposed, it changes from a objective measure of hate speech to a subjective one, including words that may discredit, humiliate, hurt, or offend. And it's especially that last word that is, I think, so deeply problematic when I read this bill, because if somebody finds offense, and I'll use the example that I had shared the other day, that because I support the oil and gas sector, of which there's ironically a bill before Parliament that would make it illegal to advertise for that, but there have been Liberals in Parliament that have said that my views in support of the oil and gas sector as a key part of the economy in the region to which I represent is somehow hateful. So with what I've described there, Professor Serafin, I'm just wondering if you could expand a little bit on the impact that changing from an objective measure that would incite violence and harm, for example, versus a subjective measure that could be as low as somebody being offended by what somebody says.
So a very simple way of putting this difference is when you shift to a subjective standard, you're just formalizing the heckler's veto, right? That's what you're doing. You're giving anyone who claims offense and who claims offense wants to express that, because there's some people who won't want to do it, but anybody who wants to claim offense is potentially going to be able to do that, and effectively gains heckler's veto because they, in theory at least, have a claim against the other person for hate speech, and they can get damages and other sorts of remedies under the proposed amendments for that. So the concern is precisely this. Instead of having some kind of objective standard that weighs both the expressive rights of the one party and the rights of the other party, you're one-siding the conversation. You're saying it's the offense that matters, and we don't have to take into account the expressive rights of the person entirely, and also the values that embodies, like democratic participation and everything else.
Appreciate that. Folks from Media Smarts, thanks for being here. I think this touches on what part of what your organization does, which is educating people, right? Helping people to make informed decisions, that freedom of expression can include differing opinions, including opinions that might be offensive. So when I read that portion of the bill, is something that offends someone, should that be a measure to which could result in banning from social media, the ability for the minister to create an administrative process that would ban somebody from being able to share an opinion? Would that be concerning versus teaching people how to effectively engage in civil society and the debates that we should be able to have?
Disappoint because we're not legislative experts and we don't know the legislation well or have staff who can do that. What I can share is we will always support that education needs to be considered. And what I would say about the bill is that what our concern is that education is missing and is a critical part, as you're describing, of the solution of how we're going to, get to a better place, which I think is our goal. And I know it's a long-term solution, so it's not as exciting perhaps as, some others, but it is an important and evidence-based one.
Teaching people to be able to argue, and I think that's one of the beautiful things of what Parliament is supposed to be. Professor Serafin, just in the last minute or so, your experience as a professor facing some of those challenges, the DEI, the well-intended, some of the possible negative consequences of that. Is there anything you'd like to add to that as in the next 30 seconds or so? I know it's a big subject, but.
Well, the only thing I'd add to that is, in 30 seconds, is that if you value universities as centers of intellectual life and as cultural contributors, then you would think that in a robust democratic society, they would have viewpoint diversity reflected as well. And EDI policies are part of the problem. It's not the only problem affecting universities, but they're definitely contributing to those problems right now in universities.
Have you faced some of those challenges yourself?
I have, yes. And I can get into it, but I don't think I have enough time to do so.
We're at 5 minutes. Thank you very much. Ms.
Please,
Latanzio.
if you're so inclined. Thank you.
Yes, you can submit to the clerk. You're more than welcome to submit to the clerk at any time. Make it quick, though, because our report will be done the second week in December here. Ms. Latanzio for 5.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Hill and Mr. Johnson, your organization has partnered with Canadian Journalism Foundation to work on enhancing trust around quality journalism. Can you tell us more about why you believe quality journalism needs support at this time, and what are some of the challenges that quality journalism has experienced over the last few years?
The Canadian Journalism Foundation has had projects that we have been a part of or worked with. We don't have expertise in the area of what the problems are, or to specifically answer your question around what is a remedy. We do refer to and reinforce heavily with everyone we work with the importance of journalistic standards, of being able to know what makes a source verifiable, and that professional journalism allows us that opportunity to determine what is a reliable source and then put our trust in that source.
And
Go ahead.
I would highlight as well that identifying that a source is reliable is not the end of critical thinking. It's the beginning of critical thinking. Mm-hmm. That the skills of verifying sources tell us which sources are worth reading closely. So we're not advocating that people blindly trust everything that they read in a legitimate news source, but rather that they sift out things that are not worth their attention so that they can apply their critical thinking to those reliable sources that deserve it.
And so therefore, have they made recommendations to you? Have they been specific? And if they have, would you be able to share those recommendations or those findings with the committee?
Made recommendations? No, not at all. We've not had those conversations with them.
Not yet, or?
No. It's not part of our mission or vision or our work. Okay.
So going back to some of the questions that were asked this afternoon in terms of establishing that public trust. We've made comments around the table in terms of the role of politicians. So do you think that politicians who mislead the public with regards to, false notions, as we've heard about, people being forced to eat bugs, or the non-existence of a dental program, which has, 1 million people have been able to access to date, it enhances or hurts the trust for the public, in your opinion?
So, as we stated, although I'm not familiar with these specific examples, but what we do know from our work with young people and from work in the field is that it is really important for authority figures that people have trust in, to be as truthful as they possibly can and to share good factual information, because that helps build trust in democracy, trust in institutions. And we know that people of influence, if they deliberately share mis or disinformation, that can have more impact than if it came from elsewhere.
Okay. So you spoke extensively in your opening remarks on the key of digital media literacy and educating the young, the youth. Can you explain exactly where this takes place? Are you invoking programs in schools? Like, how are you ensuring that the youth are becoming, media savvy, or being able to distinguish between what is true, what is factual, what are the sources? So how are you helping implement this for the youth?
So we've been doing this work for about 26 years. We were started by a group of concerned citizens. So we're a completely independent charity. We seek funding from multiple sources. What we started to do was create resources for educators. So we have a suite of resources, lesson plans, workshops, games, activities, tip sheets for parents, for educators. All are available on our website free of charge, English and French. Everything always is bilingual and always free of charge. And it's there for any educator in the country to use in the classroom. We also provide resources with broad public awareness campaigns for adults. We've done work with New Canadians. We've done work in shelters. We've done all kinds of projects to help increase the digital and media literacy of our citizens.
My last question is to you, Mr. Sarafin. What do you think of Mr. Poilievre's decision to muzzle his MPs? I'm going to give you the opportunity now to answer that question, who seek to defend and advocate on behalf of their community for such programs as housing.
So my answer to that is I don't know what I think about Edmund Burke's views about parliamentary democracy, and this is a fully a debate that I think relates to the relationship between individual elected parliamentarians and their constituencies. And honestly, I don't have a strong opinion on this.
Thank you. We're over time.
I can assure him the Conservatives are free to support our leader and
Thank
our
Mr.
freedom in Concord.
We'll get back here. Come back to the chair, please. You're out of time. Yeah, it was 5:20. Yeah, you're out of chair. You're out of time. Thank you, Ms. Latanzio. If you wanted to submit a brief, you have until December the 6th. Then the analysts will work over the break, and then when we come back in January, we should have the makings of a report. So, Mr. Serafin, I think you were asked at one point, would you submit a brief? You can, but it has to be in by December the 6th, okay? I want to thank you. I want to thank Ms. Hill and Mr. Johnson. Just for the committee again, Monday, 11 to 1, we will do Catherine Tate. The clerk is trying to add from 3:30 to 5:30, maybe to 6:30, depending on resources for the continuation of freedom of expression. So the problem that we've had is we don't have enough witnesses. So please get to Danielle as soon as you can with a list of witnesses. We're having some issues. Some have agreed and then have backed out for various reasons. But if we're going to extend on Monday for 2, maybe 3 hours, she needs to get on this right away so that we have the extra time on this report. Okay, is the committee in agreement then? Oh, okay. Before, go ahead, Mr. Norma.
When will we know? Just because I know other people have committee on Monday afternoon. When will we know from the clerk when we have resources so that we can then plan substitutes and whatever we need to plan?
She's hoping as soon as possible. There's a number. I did see the list of committees for Monday. You're right. It's fairly heavy. As soon as she can get back to us. It's all about resources.
And if we can't, then we'll have to figure out an alternate plan.
Yep. Mr. Cork.
Just like today, we had 2 hours for 2 witnesses.
Yeah.
You know, we usually have 3 witnesses for 1 hour. Let's just please maximize the time. Let's not draw it out. If we only get 2 or 3 people, let's not split it up and, and add more time for no reason. We need, it should be 3 witnesses per hour and, and not extend it past that, just to be efficient.
Thank you. Any other comments? Are we in agreement to adjourn? Thank you.
Oh my God.